And so, this week's Parshas Kedoshim, we have many mitzvahs. And so sometimes it's hard to, it's hard to decide what to talk about. But there's a couple mitzvahs that the Parsha discusses, which, I think there's a lot of chizik and a lot of practical eitzes that we can take away from, which is the concept of Shaatnez. You know that the Parsha tells us the mitzvah, one of the chukim, one of the categories of mitzvahs that we don't necessarily have a logical explanation for, included in that category of chok is Shaatnez, not to mix wool and linen together. Under that umbrella mitzvah, you also have a prohibition of crossbreeding different types of plants. You also have a prohibition of crossbreeding different types of animals. Generally speaking, this idea of mixing things that should not be mixed together. That's the prohibition of Shaatnez, Kaim, and so on. Now again, as I said, generally speaking, that mitzvah is considered to be a chok, something that we can't necessarily explain why it is, or what's specifically wrong about wool and linen in particular to bring them together. But what the Sforno HaKadoshim do tell us, however, is what happens, God forbid, when such a mixture does take place. Again, we might not be able to explain why is it that wool and linen together causes this negative effect. What the negative effect that's caused by that mixture, that we do relatively we have an understanding of. And it's as follows. The Gemara tells us that when the Rabban Shalom first created the world, so Chazal say that one of the names that he used, his divine names that he used to create the world, is the name Shachi, Shin Daled Yud. What's the power, what's the significance of that name? So Chazal say that when Hashem first created the world was Cholech u'mispashet. The world was becoming exceedingly bigger and bigger, expanding as time went on. And the Rabban Shalom decided that at some point, Sha'amar Le'olam Maydai, he said, okay, that's enough. That's as big as I want planet Earth to be, that's as big as I want the sun to be, as big as the universe I want it to be. Sha'amar Le'olam Maydai, he said, this is enough. And those words, Sha'amar, that he said, Le'olam, to his universe, Dai, it's enough. The first letters of that is the name Shachi, Shin Daled Yud. Now what's the significance of this? What does it mean that the world was getting bigger and bigger, and Hashem decided at some point, okay, it's enough? So the simple explanation of that is, as the words say, that literally the universe was just expanding and getting bigger and bigger in size. But the Tzaddikim have taught that there's also a deeper meaning behind that, and it means as follows. The Rebbeinu Shalom created the world in such a way where we live in a complicated place. Life that we live is one that's described as a life of pulos hamishtanos. Pulos hamishtanos means actions that are very different from each other. There's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs. There's a lot of things that look this way, things that look that way. There's a lot of complexity in life. And what's amazing is that although there's so much complexity in life and so much what would seem to be even random or chaos in life, we believe, as Jews, we believe that it all comes from one source, the Rebbeinu Shalom. And so you have the one God that created a world full of billions and billions of things. And the objective of a Jew, the job of a Jew in this world, is to be involved, is to come down to this world where there's so many things, and there's so much contradiction, and there's so much complexity, and to have the emunah, to have the clarity, to have the belief, to be able to trace all of these complexities back to its one source. That's the idea, that's the goal, that's what emunah is. To go through life and to experience complexity and contradiction, and to believe that all this contradiction that I experience, the good and the bad of life, it all comes from one source. But here is what the Rebbeinu Shalom said when he said, it's enough. The Rebbeinu Shalom, when he first created the world and the world was getting bigger and bigger, what that means is that the complexities, the contradictions, the chaos of life was becoming more and more and more. And Hashem determined that the amount of contradiction that he created in the world is the perfect amount, both to give us a test, but not so much contradiction and so much questions and so much darkness that we wouldn't be able to break through it. When a person, God forbid, violates the laws of Shaatnez, of crossbreeding, of mixing things that shouldn't be mixed together, what you're doing is, chas v'shalom, you're adding complexity to life, adding complexity to the universe that shouldn't be there. And so the concept of Shaatnez, of these laws, of not crossbreeding things that shouldn't be mixed, is as follows, It's like the Rebbeinu Shalom made like apples and pears, two separate fruit. And when you look at an apple, the concept is you look at an apple, you have to be able to trace the roots back to the original source. This apple came from an apple tree, which came from an original apple tree, back and back and back all the way to Hashem himself. And you look at a pear, and you can do the same thing. Well, this pear came from a tree, which came from another tree, all the way back to Hashem himself. But then when you take an apple and a pear and you mix it together, right? And that's not necessarily Klein, but you know what I mean. When you mix it together, then you now created a new complexity in life, something new that adds more nuance and more contradiction and more complexity to life that the Rabbanu Shalom didn't give us. And the idea is that a person, we have no choice but to deal with the questions that Hashem throws at us. But if we were to add more questions to that, by making life more complicated than it has to be, then the Rabbanu Shalom said, well, I gave you the strength to break through the darkness that I put in front of your life. But darkness that you add to your own life, confusion that you add to your own life, you don't necessarily have the strength to break through that. And so the Rabbanu Shalom therefore gave us this mitzvah of Shaatnez, of not crossbreeding, of keeping things that are not supposed to be confused, keeping them separate, not adding confusion to life. What that means is, in a broader sense, it means that the Rabbanu Shalom, again, each and every one of us is given complexity, given contradictions, and different questions in life to handle. But if the questions are coming from Hashem, then that means He's also giving us the ability to get an answer to those questions, or at least to be able to handle that question. But if we, on our own, generate more complexity and more darkness and more confusion than the Rabbanu Shalom did for us, then the Rabbanu Shalom says, well, I didn't make life as complicated as you're making it. And so, if the questions that we bring upon ourselves, we don't necessarily have the strength to be able to answer those questions. Now, let me give an example of what this, to bring this down to earth, because none of us, I don't think we're farmers, I don't think we probably are going to be faced with the challenge of crossbreeding species or animals. So, let's bring it down to earth. When a person, let's say life is full of ups and downs. It's full of ups and downs. There are good times in life, there are some hard times in life. Sometimes a person's not feeling well, sometimes a person's feeling healthy. A tendency of a human being sometimes is to crossbreed tzaros, to mix tzaros together. What do I mean? So I'll give you an example. I remember this from a few years ago. To me, it was like, it was a powerful thing. I was watching a documentary about a guy. He is an adventurer by trade. Like, what does this guy do for a living? Like, some people crunch numbers and sit behind a desk or have to deal with emails. What this guy does for a living is that he climbs Everest. He crosses the Atlantic, by himself. He has an amazing, amazing life. This guy wrestles bears. One of these real macho, any of us would dream to have a life like that, And so I was watching a documentary about him, and the scene was that he was scaling a mountain. He was climbing a mountain in Mexico with his bare hands, without any rope or anything like that. And he's climbing, and he loses his grip for a second, and he falls on a cactus. Okay, listen, it happens. So he falls on a cactus. He gets up, and he's picking the needles, out of his pants because he got caught in the cactus. And the microphone caught under this guy's breath that what he was saying to himself, all my life, all I do is poke things out of my pants. That's what this guy said. I'm saying to myself, Rabbanu Shalom, you have the most amazing life. It's true. Every once in a while you fall in a cactus and you have to pull the needles out of your pants. It's true. But the guy says, all my life, all I'm doing is pulling needles out of my pants. That's called crossbreeding tzaros. See what crossbreeding tzaros means? It means, there's a pocket over here where you're picking needles out of your pants. And there's a pocket over here where you're picking needles out of your pants. But what this guy did, he did Shaatnez. And he crossbred tzaros that don't belong together. And so instead of seeing life as, okay, there's a moment of good, a moment of bad, and a moment of good. And that's something you could handle. The human being is able to handle pockets of negativity and pockets of darkness. That's the level, that darkness Hashem gave us, and He gave us the strength to overcome that. The problem with this guy, for example, is that he started crossbreeding the darkness. And all of a sudden, he now looks at his life as if it's one long stream of tzaros. Well, that level of complexity, of confusion, you brought that upon yourself. And the Rabbanu Shalom never promised to give you the strength to overcome that. It's more than that. So we do this all the time. Like, how often does it happen? Like, you can't find your keys in the morning, right? And you catch yourself thinking, like, I'm always losing my keys. Really? I mean, you're always losing your keys. You're always losing your keys. If there was a biography about you, that's what it would be. Just, one chapter. He just always lost his keys. That's what it would be. It's not like that. Sometimes this happens. Sometimes that happens. There's a capitulum in Tehillim. It's an amazing thing. There's a story with David Melech. Everyone's masking David Melech went through darkness. He went through tsaros. That's for sure. So one of the harshest times of David's life was when he was being chased. When he was, when his life was being threatened by his own son, Avshalom. Avshalom rebelled against him, raised up a coup against the government, and David Melech was on the run. And so there's a capitulum Tehillim where David Melech says like this: Mizmor LaDavid, a song of David. When he was running away from his son Avshalom, then he goes on, Hashem, I have so much tsaras, difficulty. So the Gemara Brachos asks an obvious question: a song of David as he's running away, a song? It's not a song, it's a kina, it's a lamentation. What's he singing? So the Gemara says, no, David found something to sing about. David thought to himself, if I was being threatened by one of my servants, he would have no compassion on me. But now that I'm being chased by my own son, even if he does catch me, maybe he'll have compassion. So first of all, two things. I mean, it's very nice to be an optimist, but like, what are you doing? What is David Melech trying to do by focusing on that small point of goodness? And more than that, the rest of the capital is sad. The rest of the capital is Hashem, I have so much tsaras. It's just that one word, Mizmor. Well, the answer is as follows. Sometimes when a person looks at the situation in life and all they see is just one long stream of pulling needles out of your pants, you can't even open your mouth to daven. Because the person is overwhelmed by that difficulty to the point of where the person completely gives up. In order for David to even be able to cry, in order for David to even be able to express to Hashem how much pain he's in, even to allow that, David Melech had to begin to separate the darkness and to be able to find some point of goodness, to say that, listen, it's not all terrible. And because it's not all terrible, I'm not overwhelmed by what is terrible. And because of that, I'll have the strength to be able to face it. Like very often, people make one of two mistakes, which is either to not see any good in life, and then there's no motivation to open up a Tehillim, there's no motivation to try to fix anything because it's all terrible anyway. Or the opposite extreme, which is everything is good, everything's fine, I'm just going to pretend that everything's fine, I'm just going to, I'm not going to pay attention to reality. That's also unhealthy. When a person's, when there are challenges in life, and for a person to be told, well, you just focus on the good, just look at the good, don't pay attention to that which is negative, first of all, it's just delusional. And second of all, there's a part of the person that wants to express their emotions. And if the person is upset, they want to be able to express that. So to say that everything is negative is terrible. But to say that everything is positive is also just not true. The concept is, there are difficulties, there are moments where you're picking needles out of your pants. But don't crossbreed the tsaras. And David Melech was in order to enable David to daven to Hashem to help him through this difficulty, he had to find something to thank Hashem for in that situation, a pocket of goodness. And when he found that one pocket, which is, well, at least it's my own son chasing me and not one of my servants, so that allowed him to have sort of the clarity of mind to then not feel overwhelmed by the tsar, but it's not like he only saw that good and ignored the reality that was in front of him, that he's in a difficult situation. But because he saw that point of goodness, and he thanked Hashem for that, it gave him the footing. It gave him the footing to then be able to see reality for what it is, which is a difficult situation with pockets of good, and so on and so forth, a nuanced situation, and that's something that the Rebbeinu Shalom will help me through. And this is, by the way, I'll share with you just a couple lines from in Likutei Halachos from Nosson Breslover. He writes this. I saw this the other day, and again, I'm not like trying to push the company thing over here, but Nosson does say the following thing: this path of Haidah v'Taida, of thanking Hashem for the small things in life, while the overarching story that a person is going through might be difficult, but to find something to thank Hashem for, he says as follows. is a wondrous way to find your way back to Hashem. He says again, why? Because the idea is not to thank Hashem for everything and to pretend as if everything's great. That's just delusion. And the idea is not to just see everything as terrible because that's overwhelming. The idea is to find certain points that you're willing to recognize that are good and to thank Hashem for those points, to give you the stability and the frame of mind to then tackle the problems with some confidence. That's the idea. And so therefore the concept of Shaatnez, of these halachas, of kilayim and so on, of not to crossbreed things that don't belong, not to make life more complex than it already is. That's the idea. The idea is that life is already as complex as it should be. And to the extent that the complexity is given to us by Hashem, then that means that Hashem is also will give us His strength to handle that complexity. But the problem is that we have to just make sure not to make a mess of things more, not to add more complexity to life, not to add more questions. And the idea and the eitzah to do that is, as Yaakov Avinu instructed his shepherds as they were being sent to Esav, Revach tasim b'nei v'nei, make a space between the flocks. Just to realize that there are ups and downs, but life is not one long stream of down, and it's not one long stream of up. Revach tasim b'nei v'nei. There's linen, and there's wool, and there's this animal, and there's that animal, there's an apple, and there's a pear, and it's complex, but it's manageable, because there's space in between. And that's the idea. And this is also why even in Shemona Esrei you find this phenomenon of where before we get involved in requesting Hashem for the things that we want and the things that we need, we first praise Hashem for all the things that He has given us. And the idea is because it's not just like a nice polite thing that you say thank you before you make the next request. It's deeper than that. What's happening is that it's giving us perspective to not be overwhelmed by what we don't have yet. And it's going to give us, and that gives us the confidence to be able to face the challenges of life head on and to have the strength to be able to overcome it. So the Rebbeinu Shalom, each and every one of us, that we should be able to accept the responsibility and the achrayus of sort of dealing with the challenges of life, but always having the presence of mind not to make those challenges more complex than they already are. Sure.